trying to get you full. If I can get your screen all the way big, then I'll be happy. You got all these little blocks in front of your face. It's bothering me.
Where?
On
Oh
Skype.
yeah, I see it. I see it.
Let's see if we can just move them out of the way. No. All right, well, we'll progress. We'll get there. I'm here with Jeremy Kirsch. How do you pronounce it?
Roth. Yeah,
Roth
Roth Kushel.
Kushel. All right, give me 1 second. It's probably the best way to do it here. Can you still see my screen?
Yeah. Here, I'll send you another link of another story that just got published in the local newspaper in Kansas City.
Awesome. You said you might be able to get a video clip?
Yes. Uh, I could. Yeah, I'm in the midst of trying to edit, splice one down to like the key part of where the question and the when they assaulted me.
Awesome.
So, do you want me to try to quickly do that right now, or is that cool if I get that to you after we finish the call?
That's fine. Either way is fine with me. I'm actually probably a better video editor than I am at doing this. I'm still new at this dual com stuff and setting up my system on this laptop. That's why I'm having these errors. But actually getting the footage and chopping it down should be easy enough. However you want to
Okay.
do it.
Okay. I mean, I could give you the raw footage if I could give you the link to the raw footage.
Yeah, that would be
But
awesome.
then yeah, and then I just give maybe ask you to sort of like not include so much from the lobby. Like there's a part where I'm going back and forth with the police officer about my ID and stuff like that.
All
And
right.
for now, I'd like to sort of like focus on, more on like the actual arrest and the question and that type of thing.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Are you familiar with our editor Andrew Myers? He's the one that was the "Don't Taser Me, Bro" guy from the John Kerry video.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's actually our editor at We Are Change New York. He's a good friend of mine too. So we
Oh,
have a lot of familiarity with this type of
interesting.
incident.
Okay, let me see. Let me see if I can pull that YouTube link up right now.
My computer's doing okay. I have this streaming. It's streaming to a private YouTube account. That's the only way I could figure out how to record it because my computer was going so slow.
Uh-huh.
So I'm just streaming it out to a YouTube account and it's recording there, and then I'm gonna cut that up and add it to the article I'm writing.
Interesting.
How long has it been since this event happened in
May. So
May?
it's been months, yeah.
It's interesting that it's just now starting to get noticed. That was
Well,
actually
yeah. Oh,
one.
sorry.
Go ahead. One of the articles I was reading last night said that it was very interesting how it just now, and even the update that the library put out was just yesterday. Like they just now put out an update, a
Yeah, I mean
statement.
that it took a lot of behind the scenes work in a way to try to get it to a place where people were willing to talk about it publicly. Because once the minute that you start getting charges involved, and then there's lawyers involved, and a lot of times the lawyers don't want anybody to talk about it publicly because they think it can only hurt the situation. So, so I've been sort of putting out, bits of information here and there about it, but I wanted the library to lead the way on it to make it really about its core First Amendment issue. And what I said and the reason for me being treated like that, I think, is also equally important. But I think the main issue is this issue of the First Amendment and the policing of speech in a library.
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt, that is a fundamental key issue and ingredient of the New World Order complex as we move forward, and it's all about limiting speech and limiting the ability to express yourself, and especially forms of expression that subvert or take authority away from the state. It's all about maintaining control over people's minds, as I'm sure you're well aware of.
For sure. I mean, that's what's sort of interesting is that in the main police report, the arresting officer who actually works with Homeland Security, he mischaracterizes the content of my speech by saying that I accuse the Jewish and American communities of doing terrorism. Whereas in the actual content of my speech, I use political terms like the United States, Israel, geopolitical, statecraft, state sponsored, terrorism, these types of things. So you're right. It's sort of like trying to control the parameters of the way that people understand things.
It's exactly what it is, and it's an interesting correlation. I don't want to get too far away from the event. I really want to cover from your perspective what happened. I want to get your side of the story and all that kind of stuff. We can get into the broader issues, but ultimately, anti-Semitism in the ADL behavior, anti defamation laws, essentially are the demise of free speech. They were the first laws created where they said you're not allowed to say something, you're not allowed to write something. You know what I mean?
They basically run counter to the First Amendment
Right.
tradition. And I mean,
Exactly.
there's common law aspects about what actual speech is unlawful, and that it has to do with making threats, or that type of scenario, or advocating for violence or advocating for genocide. And of course that's what the whole post 9/11 era is state sponsored genocidal conspiracy anti-Semitic theories, basically, that have no backing in fact and are all based on fraud.
I couldn't agree more. Um, so this happened in May, and you
Yeah.
you were at an event that was a speaking event at a library in Kansas City.
Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri.
All right, Kansas City, Missouri. Make sure we get that out. And
Not I'm not trying to start any interstate war.
I completely agree. Dennis Roth. Who's Dennis Ross? Dennis Ross was the speaker.
Dennis Ross was the main speaker, but there was also, I believe, Harry Truman's grandson was did an introduction, and then there was a video message from former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres, who just passed away, and who is sort of the recognized godfather of the unrecognized Israel nuclear program.
Oh, I see. I see. They categorize you as a local activist. Just saying. I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd categorize myself as like an independent documentarian, a political analyst. truth, justice, peace, and freedom activists. That's sort of, I've always, as long as I've been, made a transition from, I started out actually political work and doing peace activism, but then as I began to learn about September 11th, I understood what key role deception and uncovering deception and countering it with a factual and more honest narrative was key, and actually came prior to working for peace, because almost every time that people are sent to war, there's some type of deceptive
Yes,
event that riles
always.
them up. So
Yep, that is a fundamental realization that you come to in the anti-war and in the pro-peace movement and in the Enlightenment activism movement. You realize that all major wars are preset by a false flag attack, the Reichstag, the Gulf of Tonkin, etc. The main incident. It goes on throughout history. And
yeah, and sometimes they're not explicitly what you would call a classical false flag, but there always some type of deception going on,
right,
some type of contrived event.
a new Pearl Harbor, if you will.
Yeah, and it's very possible that even that, the claiming that 9/11 was a new Pearl Harbor is actually some part of the limited hangout psychological operation, meaning that it, because Pearl Harbor did come from outside, it was sort of allowed and sort of facilitated to happen.
Exactly.
September 11th was not some type of external attack, unless you consider it that it was like the U.S., the core of the U.S. Criminal establishment, allowing the core of the Israeli criminal establishment to do it, and then to blame it on the Saudi criminal establishment is sort of what it looks.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's a global cabal. I mean, if you go, you can go back to even like what's his name, Johns Hobbes. Don't call it a conspiracy or
John
proof.
Coleman. Oh no, oh not John
John
Coleman.
Todd, proofs of a conspiracy. John
Uh,
Todd was 1970s. I want to say probably before that 1700s, and it's a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy, and he basically drew all the connections between what is like commonly called the Khazarian Empire and the formation of the Illuminati in Germany and the secret societies with the Masonic orders coming to America, and all that was before even like the Tragedy and Hope Anglophile network that Joe Plummer wrote about.
uh-huh.
I can't remember his name, but it's
Who?
the book Tragedy and Hope. I always
Carol Quigley.
Quigley, yeah, Quigley's
Yeah.
book, right? Exactly. And Quigley documented, it's a Harvard educated professor documented the Anglophile network, the network that has worked its way into American politics. So really, it's always been here, and there's
Uh-huh.
always been this off-site control of America. And even in sociology in itself, you could say that there's always been a hierarchical class that is seated outside or above of the proletarians or the plebeians or whatever the working class of the time may be, the sheriffs. There's always this external order. The what did Adam Smith called it, the invisible hand that controls the economy. And there's all these analogies for what was behind 9/11, but ultimately I think it incorporates the deep state, as I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, it seems like that there's always sort of throughout our human history, at least in terms of what we might call history, there's always this sort of oligarchically inclined small group of people that are, in different times in different places. It sort of changes over
Right.
time in terms of different factions, that type of thing. But there's this sort of this long term, the human history in some level is really the main dynamic and story going on, is how are we the people as humanity in relationship to being controlled and managed in a top-down
Right.
bureaucratic fashion, in a hierarchical fashion, and whether we decide we want to actually have autonomy and rule ourselves. The true meaning of democracy, not majority vote, you know. And this, of course, is the best of a democratic republic, a constitutional republic, is where first and foremost people have individual autonomy. They are, you know, responsive to natural law first, and then in a hierarchy of sovereignty that I would call it, we then go down from common law to the rights of the private individual, then a delegated authority to restricted public government, and then under that we have corporations that are given a you know small amount of sovereignty in relationship to protection from liability by our state apparatus, and that of course is the history of the corporation. And of
Yep.
course, what's happened now is it's been everything's been turned on its head in a way, and it's being run down through a corporatist, global corporatist oligarchy, down and then using that to control the governments, and using the governments to control the private individuals, and then using that to destroy our commons, both our intellectual commons, but also our ecological commons.
Very, very well put. Very well put. Honestly. So let's talk more about this story that we're focused on now. You're currently you're involved in a civil suit against Kansas City, the Missouri, the county.
Not
Who is your
not
suit
not
against
yet.
directly? Not yet. You're not
Not
actively involved in a suit.
we're still, yeah, myself and the librarian, we're still involved in a criminal case, what is essentially a criminal case against us by the by Kansas City, the municipality, by the yeah. So
Wow.
we're still defending ourselves from these, at least I'll speak for myself, these are pretty obviously specious charges, and that the charges, the arrest and charges themselves by by private security first of all, and then an off-duty liaison to Homeland Security operating out of the Fusion Center, or were used to interrupt and violate multiple pieces of rights protected under the First Amendment. Because of course I should have been allowed, even if it was my turn was over. I asked a question, I had a follow up, and then I was grabbed. Even if my time was over, I should have been asked to go sit down. I should have been able to return to the assembly. That's one part of the First Amendment. I'm also, you know, a grassroots journalist, a We the People's Press person like yourself. And the Supreme Court has found that corporate journalists are not the only ones that hold press rights. That the individual, it's a private right.
Right.
And I was involved in that. And my buddy Greg McCarran, he was holding the camera. We were both ejected. I wanted to follow up, like is my, my practice is I like to follow up with these public figures after a public question, in after a book signing. When a lot is learned when you actually sort of get one on one with somebody, and you can learn a lot from their facial expressions. Like people, when I talked to Vice President Biden, not only would I point out that the Secret Service knew who I was, allowed me to get very close to the vice president, doesn't consider me any kind of physical threat to public figures, but also uh, that question was allowed. There was no one arrested after that. They actually, Secret Service decided to sort of pull the scene in response to the question, but people looked at Biden's reaction and his facial expression and stuff like that, and some people who are can't see the actual evidence for September 11th, including the sort of obvious controlled demolitions, looked at Biden's response and we're like, oh my gosh, there's something here. He didn't call him a crazy conspiracy theorist. He basically said, let me see this paper, and then he left.
Right. I mean, that's a big part of what we do. That's why I admire you. I told you when I first looked into this story, I looked into some of your body of work and just saw those kind of episodes and that kind of, that civil action that you talk about, that civil journalistic action is actually, inspired by Luke Podolsky, who I work for, We Are Change. And watching his videos back in the day in the loose change era, in the Larry Silverstein era. It's real fifth estate journalism, and like you said, it's all about catching the humanity in these godlike cult like figures that we have, these figureheads that we create from these corporations and political complexes. But when they're humanized, when people like us, when people like you you can see the fear in their face, you can see that their worry, their anxiety. It empowers people. It empowers other people to realize that we're not beneath them. They're like us. They just surround themselves with these false nobilities and these false perceptions of notoriety that are nothing more than the enablement, the embodiment of corruption and lies.
Great points. It's so true. I mean, when Luke first confronted Brzezinski in New York City, there was the sense of the breaking of the what do you call it, the screen,
Tradition, yeah.
or the third wall, even,
Right.
and the idea of like, we're in the game, people, as to
Mm-hmm.
reference Patrick Clausen,
Yep.
who is the guy from the who was actually Dennis Ross was on the same panel at the time when this guy Patrick Clausen from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy publicly advocated pretty much for a use of covert operations in trying to help the U.S. president get the United States to war with Iran, as if that were some type of unadulterated good. He said, "We're in the game, people." So when Luke and then many other people followed up with interjecting themselves into the public sphere in flesh and blood in relationship to a lot of these public figures who prior to that were really always like in, well vacuumed, air conditioned studios, Charlie Rose, or they're on, morning TV on NBC. It's Mika Brzezinski talking to her dad or something like that. It's pretty easy to sort of consider that these people are the new, the new gods, and they just talk from on high. But when you actually get in the room, and there's, has nothing to do with physical threat, but
Yeah.
the very first amendment, as the executive director of the Kansas City Public Library said. He said the very first amendment to the Constitution, that is where the power really lies. And so the ability of words, strong words but peaceful words, to interject themselves into a an oligarchically based state sponsored mind control apparatus. So we the people are in the game. And also, like Karl Rove supposedly said, we're history's actors, and while we continue to act, you people will analyze that. No, no, no. We are history's actors too, and now you guys are going to have to respond to the way what we say, the articles we write, the news we uncover, the analysis we do, the public statements we make in a public forum and in a very traditional American place like a library.
Yeah, that's one of the most disturbing aspects of this case to me. Is essentially what it appears is that the community Jewish faction, what is it,
The the Jewish Community Foundation
foundation of Greater
of
Kansas City, essentially becomes a totalitarian control and outside of government control of government private assets such as the library. Ultimately, I think the library's authority of what happens, of who should be charged, especially you were charged with like trespassing, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct. I'm still facing a trespassing charge, even though the venue holder themselves, the library, no one from the library has said that they have signed off on any type of trespassing charge. In
Exactly.
fact, they're against it, as proven by their employee, Stephen Woolfolk, who organized the event, who gave the Jewish Community Foundation the right to bring a private security detail under the proviso of the library's stated policy and the First Amendment commitments and responsibilities, was arrested and beat up by a private security detail. And you're completely right. This is under color of law. And then of course, someone actually had to sign the tickets. You can't have a private citizen sign tickets and then have the prosecutor's office charged, go ahead on that. So the off-duty detective who works out of the fusion center he signed the tickets himself.
It's crazy. My mind is literally blown right now. And of course, the projection. It's always about projections. Even in this well written article, the best written article I found on this, it says the Jewish Community Foundation of Greater Kansas City, given that there had been a shooting at the Jewish Community Center in Kansas City several years back, the library agreed to allow off duty police to be on the scene. So they're using a shooting at a community center several years ago that's not even at the library as an excuse to bring privately paid enforcers to illegally enforce laws and rules and regulations counter against the United States Bill of Rights and Constitution.
A
This
good
is
point. And if it had actually been that they were, okay, we can understand communities get nervous when they're subjected to terrorism, and of course we should always look at big public events of terrorism with skeptical eyes.
right.
They're all, at the very least, they're always used by the worst elements of the so-called security state to ramp up, more Orwellian control systems. But at the same time, okay, all right, you're nervous, you want to bring a security detail, fine. They have to follow the rules. They're not allowed,
Right.
counterterrorism, former counterterrorism officers and guys who do counterterrorism are not supposed to be moderated